Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Elena never imagined that courage had a smell. But that Monday morning, as she pushed through the revolving doors of Hawthorne Global, she discovered it did. Courage smelled like freshly brewed coffee, expensive leather sofas, and the citrus scent of ambition, hanging in the air like a dangerous promise. She clutched her portfolio against her chest, a fragile shield against the world surrounding her. Her low-heeled shoes squeaked quietly on the polished marble, each step echoing like a reminder, "You don't belong here." The lobby was massive. Cold white lights fell from the high ceiling, reflecting off glass and steel panels that seemed to whisper, "Success, power, exclusivity." Executives in impeccable suits walked past her without looking, as if she were invisible. And maybe she was. After all, what was a small-town girl doing in a place like this? But Elena had something nobody there knew. She didn't give up easily. She took a deep breath, straightened her black blazer that Shed bought on clearance, lifted her chin, and that's when she saw him. Alexander Hawthorne. He was in the side corridor near the elevators, talking to a man in a gray suit. But it wasn't the conversation that held Elena's attention. It was him, tall, broad shoulders. The navy blue suit fell perfectly over his body, as if it had been designed for him, and it probably had been. His dark hair was slightly messy, as if Head run his fingers through it absent-mindedly. And his eyes, God, his eyes gray, intense, like a storm about to break. Elena felt something strange happen in her chest. A tightness, a warmth, a tremor that ran up her spine and made her fingers tingle. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. It was as if he had a magnetic field around him, pulling her closer without her taking a single step. And then it happened. He turned his head. His eyes met hers. The world stopped. It wasn't a casual glance. It wasn't one of those quick looks people exchange in crowded lobbies. No, it was different. It was as if he saw her, really saw her. As if, somehow, inexplicably, he knew exactly who she was, or who she could be. Elena felt her heart race. The air grew heavier. Her mouth went dry. She wanted to blink, look away, do anything that would break this strange and dangerous spell. But he held her gaze 1 second, 2, 3, 1 second longer than it should have been. And then he turned his face back to the man beside him, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Elena knew it. She felt it in her prickled skin, in her caught breath, in the way her legs trembled slightly under her skirt. She swallowed hard and forced her feet to move. She needed to get to the reception desk. She needed to introduce herself. She needed to remember why she was there. Interview. Personal assistant. A chance. The receptionist, a blonde woman with red lipstick and perfectly manicured nails, looked at Elena with the expression of someone evaluating livestock at a market. Name? Elena Reed. I have an interview at 9. The woman typed something on the computer, unhurried, and then pointed to a hallway on the left, room 12. Good luck. The tone made it clear. You're going to need it. Elena thanked her and headed down the corridor. The walls were transparent glass, allowing her to see the meeting rooms, the modern offices, the people working like well-oiled machines. Everything here breathed efficiency, perfection, control. She stopped in front of the door to room 12 and took a deep breath once more. You can do this. You deserve this. But before she could knock, she heard voices on the other side, 2 male voices. One of them was his. Alexander Hawthorne. Elena froze. She didn't want to listen. She knew she shouldn't. But his voice was deep, firm, impossible to ignore. Look, I understand the need to fill the position. But we need someone who really understands how things work here. She has good references, said the other voice. Softer, hesitant. References from a small town. Alexander's voice was loaded with disdain. She's not one of us. Too soft. Too small. Too small town. The words fell on Elena like ice. She's not one of us. Too soft. Too small town. Her heart plummeted. It wasn't the rejection that hurt she'd been rejected before. It was the cold, distant way he said it, as if she were less, as if she wasn't even worth trying. Elena felt tears burn in her eyes. But she wasn't going to cry. Not there. Not in front of them. She took a step back, then another, turned to leave, to escape from this place that would never be hers. When the door opened, Alexander Hawthorne was there, standing in the doorway, looking directly at her. His gray eyes widened slightly, surprise, maybe, or guilt. They stared at each other, and Elena knew that he knew she had heard everything. The silence between them was deafening. The air became dense, almost solid. She could feel the heat emanating from his body, the smell of his cologne, something woody, expensive, masculine. She could see his jaw tighten, the muscles tense beneath his skin. He opened his mouth to say something, but Elena wasn't going to wait to hear empty apologies. She lifted her chin, met his eyes with all the dignity she could muster, and said, her voice steady, "Don't worry, Mr. Hawthorne." Message received loud and clear. Then she turned and began to walk. She didn't run, she didn't stumble. She just walked, head held high and heart shattered, while each step took her away from the man who, for a brief and stupid moment, she had thought might truly see her. But deep in her mind, a question hammered away. Why, then, did that look in the lobby seem to say exactly the opposite? Elena didn't look back. She couldn't. If she did, he would see the pain in her eyes, the anger mixed with shame, the way her hands trembled holding the portfolio as if it were the only solid thing in a world that had just crumbled. She crossed the hallway with firm strides, her heels hitting the floor like a war drum. Each step was a declaration. I don't need you. I don't need this place. I will survive. But inside, something was broken. The elevator doors were just ahead, silver, shiny, reflecting the image of a girl trying to look strong when all she wanted was to disappear. She pressed the button harder than necessary. Come on, come on, open already. The elevator beeped. The doors began to slide. And then she heard it. Elena, wait. His voice deep, urgent. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. Don't turn around. Don't give him that satisfaction. But before she could enter the elevator, he was beside her. Alexander Hawthorne, Millionaire CEO, the man who had shattered her with a few cold words. Please, he said, lower now, almost hesitant. Give me a minute. I don't have a minute for you. Elena replied, stepping into the elevator. He followed her in. The doors closed with a soft, definitive sound. Alone. The space was small, tight. The air immediately became denser, warmer, charged with something neither of them could name. Elena turned to the panel, pretending he didn't exist. She pressed the lobby button so hard her fingertip turned white. The elevator began to descend. Silence. A suffocating, heavy silence that pressed on her chest like an invisible hand. She could feel his presence so close that the heat from his body seemed to touch hers even without physical contact. She could hear his breathing controlled, but not calm. She could smell his woody cologne mixed with something more human, more intimate, sweat, tension, something indefinable that made her stomach flip. You weren't supposed to hear that, he finally said, his voice echoing in the confined space. Elena let out a short, bitter laugh. But I did, I know, and He stopped, as if the words were hard to find. I was wrong. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see his reflection in the polished metal of the elevator. He was looking at her intently, his gray eyes locked on her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. Wrong to judge me, or wrong to get caught? Her voice came out sharper than intended, but she didn't regret it. Alexander took a step forward. Now he was closer, dangerously close. Wrong to think I could define you in 10 seconds. Elena turned completely, facing him head-on. The anger was there, simmering, burning just below the surface. But there was something else. Something she didn't want to admit. A chill in her stomach, a tingling on her skin, an attraction so wrong, so inappropriate, it was frightening. You don't know me, she said, her voice firm but low. And you don't need to know me, because I'm already leaving. No, you're not. She blinked, surprised. Excuse me? You're not leaving. He crossed his arms, but the posture wasn't defensive. It was determined. Give me a month. A month? Elena almost laughed. For what? So you can fire me more politely? So you can prove to me I was wrong? The words hung in the air between them, heavy and challenging. Elena studied his face, the square jaw, the slightly parted lips, the tense line of his neck, and his eyes, those damn gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Why do you care?" she asked, genuinely confused. Alexander hesitated. She saw the silent struggle happening inside him, saw the way his jaw muscles tightened, how his eyes dropped for a fraction of a second to her lips, and then he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear, "Because I can't stop thinking about you, and I don't even know why." Elena's heart stopped. The elevator kept descending, but everything around them seemed to freeze. The words echoed in her mind, turning over and over, looking for a place where they made sense. "I can't stop thinking about you." She swallowed hard. Her mouth was dry, her hands damp. "This is crazy," she whispered. "I know. You judged me without knowing me. I know. You called me too small. I was wrong." He took another step. Now they were so close she had to lift her face to look into his eyes. "You're not small. You're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're like a hurricane disguised as a breeze." Elena felt something move inside her, something warm, dangerous, impossible. "And if I say no?" she asked. Her voice soft. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what if." The elevator beeped. The doors began to open. Lobby. The exit was there, freedom, distance, safety. But Elena didn't move. Neither did Alexander. They stood there, frozen, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath brushing her face. His eyes dropped again, this time unhurried, undisguised, to her lips. She saw it, and felt her body react involuntarily, the shiver that ran up her spine, the chill in her stomach, the breath that quickened. "1 month," he repeated, his voice husky now, loaded with something she couldn't decipher. "Give me 1 month, Elena." She should say no. She should turn around and walk out of there. She should protect her heart before it was too late. But instead, she heard her own voice, firm and clear. "Okay. 1 month. But if you disappoint me again, Alexander Hawthorne, I'm leaving, and you'll never see me again." His lips curved into a half smile, the first shed seen from him. "And God, it was devastating. I won't disappoint you," he promised. The elevator doors began to close. Alexander reached out, holding them open. "Come with me," he said. "Let's start over the right way." Elena looked at his hand, strong, steady, waiting. And then, against all logic, against every instinct of self-preservation, she placed her hand in his. His skin was warm, firm, and the moment his fingers closed around hers, Elena knew she had just crossed a line, and there was no going back. Elena never imagined that nervousness had a texture, but that morning, as she walked through the glass doors of Hawthorne Global for the second time, she discovered it did. Nervousness was sticky, cold, heavy like lead on her shoulders. She adjusted her purse strap and took a deep breath. "You can do this. It's just a month. 30 days. You've been through worse." But the truth was, there was nothing worse than the feeling of being watched by dozens of curious, judgmental, suspicious eyes, because that was exactly what was happening. Every person who passed her in the hallway slowed down just enough to take a look. Some tried to hide it, others didn't even bother. The whispers started before she even reached the 10th floor. "Who is she? Alex's new assistant? Seriously? Her?" Elena clenched her fists inside her blazer pockets and kept her head high. She wasn't going to let them see the insecurity. She wasn't going to give them that victory. When she reached the anteroom of Alexander's office, a tall woman with thin-framed glasses and hair, pulled back in an impeccable bun, greeted her with an icy smile. "You must be Elena." "I'm Vanessa, HR manager. Mr. Hawthorne is expecting you." The tone was professional, but her eyes said something else. "You won't last a week." Elena thanked her and went in. Alexander's office was exactly as she imagined, huge, minimalist, with an entire glass wall overlooking the city. Manhattan stretched out below like an empire lights. Buildings, infinite movement, and at the center of that empire was him. Alexander was standing beside his desk, leafing through some documents. He wore a dark gray suit today, no tie. The top 2 buttons of his shirt undone, His hair was slightly messy, as if He'd run his fingers through it several times. When he saw her, he looked up and smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was small, discreet, almost shy, but it was enough to make her stomach knot. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "Good morning," Elena replied, trying to sound confident. "Ready for your first day?" "No." "Yes." He laughed quietly, as if he knew she was lying. "Come on, Elle. Show you where you'll be working." He guided her to a smaller desk next to his, separated by a frosted glass divider. It was organized, clean, with a new computer still wearing its protective plastic. "All yours," he said. "If you need anything, just ask." Elena nodded and placed her purse on the desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to open the zipper. "Calm down. Breathe." Alexander returned to his own desk and picked up a stack of folders. "These are the contracts that need to be reviewed today. Nothing complicated. Just check if the numbers are right and mark anything that seems off. Can you do that?" "I can," Elena said, taking the folders with more confidence than she felt. But when she turned to place the folders on the desk, her foot hit the edge of the chair. She stumbled. The folders flew from her hands, papers scattering across the floor like confetti. "No, no, no." Elena quickly knelt down, her face burning with embarrassment. She started gathering the papers frantically, trying to organize them back together, but her hands were shaking so much she was only making it worse. "Damn it," she whispered, fighting against the tears that threatened to fall, and then he was there. Alexander knelt beside her on the floor without saying a word. He started gathering the papers with her, his movements slow, calm, as if they had all the time in the world. Elena kept her eyes down, focused on the papers, but she was completely aware of him, of the warmth of his body next to hers, of the woody smell of his cologne mixed with something more human, of the closeness, and then it happened. Their fingers touched. It was an accidental touch, brief, as they reached for the same paper at the same time, but it was like electricity. Elena froze. So did Alexander. She looked up and found herself caught in the stormy gray of his eyes. He was looking at her with an intensity that made the air disappear. He didn't look away, didn't blink, just looked. And then, slowly, he turned his hand and held hers. It wasn't a firm grip. It was gentle, almost hesitant, as if he were asking permission with the touch. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, husky. Elena couldn't speak, couldn't think. All that existed was his hand surrounding hers, the warmth spreading up her arm, through her chest, to the center of her stomach. She swallowed hard. Sorry. I'm just nervous. You don't need to apologize." He held her hand for another moment, 1 second, 2, 3, before finally letting go. But Elena could still feel it. Could feel the impression of his fingers on her skin like an invisible mark. They finished gathering the papers in silence and stood up. Alexander placed the stack back on her desk and looked at her with that half-smile she was beginning to recognize. "Breathe," he said quietly, like a secret. "You're going to do great." Elena nodded, not trusting her own voice. He went back to his desk, but she could feel his eyes on her from time to time, watching, caring. The hours passed. Elena dove into the contracts, grateful to have something to focus on that wasn't the man on the other side of the frosted glass. But then, in the middle of the afternoon, she realized she'd dropped her pen on the floor. When she bent down to pick it up, she felt her hair slip from behind her ear and fall across her face. She straightened up, pushing the hair back impatiently. But before she could do anything, Alexander was beside her. "Let me help," he said softly. And then, before she could process what was happening, he reached out and gently tucked her hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin lightly, barely touching, but it was enough to make every nerve ending in her body wake up. Elena held her breath. Alexander didn't remove his hand immediately. Instead, he let his fingers slide slowly along the side of her face, down to her jaw, before finally pulling away. "There," he said, his voice husky. "Perfect." But his eyes weren't on her hair. They were on her eyes, locked, intense, saying everything words couldn't. Elena felt her face heat up, her heart race, the electric current run through every inch of her body. This can't be happening. It can't. But it was. And the worst part, she didn't want it to stop. Alexander took a step back, breaking the moment. but the air between them was still charged, heavy, vibrating. "Keep going," he said, returning to his desk. But his voice was different, lower, more tense. Elena lowered her eyes to the papers in front of her, but the words were blurred. All she could feel was the ghost of his touch on her skin, and all she could think was, "What's happening to me?" Elena looked at the clock in the corner of her computer screen and blinked several times, trying to focus her blurred vision. 11:47 p.m. She rubbed her eyes with the backs of her hands and sighed. The office was immersed in almost absolute silence, just the low hum of the air conditioning and the soft glow of emergency lights cutting through the darkness. Everyone had left hours ago. Vanessa was the last one, shooting Elena a disapproving look before leaving. "You don't need to impress anyone by staying late. It won't make you last longer here." But Elena wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to prove herself, prove that she deserved to be there, prove that Alexander hadn't made a mistake by giving her this chance, prove to herself that she was good enough. She looked at the stack of contracts in front of her. She had already reviewed 14. 6 left to go. Just a few more. "You can do this." She picked up the pen again and went back to reading, highlighting clauses, noting inconsistencies, marking numbers that didn't add up. Her handwriting was getting increasingly crooked. Her eyes burned. But she kept going. Minutes turned into hours or maybe seconds. She didn't know anymore. What she did know was that she was tired, so tired her bones ached. Her head felt heavy. Her eyelids were starting to fall. Just one more paragraph. Just one more. The pen slipped from her fingers. Her head slowly lowered, coming to rest on the papers scattered across the desk, and Elena fell asleep. Alexander pushed the office door open with his shoulder, balancing his laptop under one arm and holding his phone with the other hand. Had left at 8 p.m. for a business dinner that dragged on longer than it should have. But he needed to grab some documents before heading home. Light from the hallway spilled into the office, partially illuminating the dark space. He was about to turn on the lights when he saw her, Elena, asleep at her desk. Alexander froze. For a long moment, he just stood there in the doorway, watching. She was turned slightly to the side, one hand still holding the pen, the other folded under her face like an improvised pillow. Her hair had escaped from its ponytail and fell in dark waves over her shoulders and the desk. Her lips were slightly parted, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Around her papers, marked contracts, handwritten notes, colorful post-its stuck on every page. Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. She had stayed alone until late at night, working. He entered the office quietly, closing the door behind him carefully to avoid making noise. He placed his laptop on his own desk and walked over to her, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. He stopped beside her desk. Up close, he could see better. The dark shadows under her eyes, the tense line of her jaw even in sleep, the hand holding the pen, her fingers stained with blue ink. "She works harder than anyone I've ever known," he thought. And then, something softer, more dangerous. "And she still thinks she's not enough." Alexander slowly crouched down, bringing himself to her level. He watched her face closely, the light freckles on the bridge of her nose, the long lashes resting on her cheeks, the delicate curve of her lips. She was beautiful. Not in the way the women in his social circle were polished, constructed, perfect. No, Elena was beautiful in a real way. Raw, true, and something inside him, something head locked away a long time ago, began to crumble. Without thinking, he reached out. His fingers brushed her hair, moving some strands that had fallen across her face. Her skin was soft, warm. He slid his fingers gently through the dark strands, feeling the silky texture, and whispered so quietly he could barely hear his own voice. "You work harder than anyone I've ever known." She didn't move, just kept sleeping, lost in some distant dream. Alexander looked at her for another moment, memorizing every detail, and then something inside him gave way completely. "She's cold." It was true. The air conditioning was on full blast, and she was there alone with nothing but the thin blazer shed worn during the day. He stood up, took off the jacket he was wearing, and went back to her carefully, so carefully, as if he were holding something precious. He placed the jacket over her shoulders, the fabric wrapping around her like a blanket too big, heavy but warm. Elena shifted slightly, settling more comfortably in the chair, and a soft sigh escaped her lips. Alexander stood there watching, his heart beating in a strange and uncomfortable way, and then he leaned in again, closer this time, so close he could smell her soft perfume, something floral, light, mixed with coffee and paper. "And you still think you're not enough?" he whispered, his voice husky, loaded with something he couldn't name. He stayed there for another moment, just looking, just feeling, and then, forcing himself to pull away before he did something stupid, Alexander stepped back. He grabbed his laptop, cast one last look at her sleeping, vulnerable, beautiful, and left the office. But as he walked down the empty hallway, he knew. He knew something had changed, that she had entered his life like a silent storm, and that he no longer knew how to live without that storm. The next morning, Elena woke up slowly, her mind still foggy from sleep. She blinked, disoriented, looking around. Sunlight streamed through the windows. People were walking in the hallways outside. "What time is it?" She looked at the clock. 7:15 a.m. She had slept in the office. Oh no, 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 no. Elena sat up quickly, her heart racing, but that's when she felt it. Something heavy on her shoulders. She looked down. A jacket, men's, expensive, with the unmistakable smell of woody cologne. Alexander's jacket. Elena held the fabric between her fingers, her heart racing, her mind spinning. He was here. He saw me sleeping. He took care of me. She looked around, searching for him, but the office was empty. Just her, the jacket, and something else, a small note folded on the desk. With trembling hands she picked it up and opened it. "You work too late. Go home. Take a shower. Rest. See you this afternoon." Elena read the words once, twice, 3 times. And then she held the jacket against her chest and closed her eyes, feeling the warmth that still remained in the fabric. She didn't know what was happening between them, but she knew she was starting to feel something she shouldn't, something dangerous, something inevitable. Elena returned to the office in the early afternoon after a few hours of stolen sleep and a shower that wasn't enough to calm the chaotic thoughts in her mind. She could still feel the weight of his jacket on her shoulders, still saw the words written in the note, still wondered what it all meant. He was just being polite, that's all. It doesn't mean anything, but her heart didn't believe that. When she pushed open the office door, Alexander was on the phone, his back to her, looking out the window that overlooked the city. He wore a black suit today, his broad shoulders tense as he spoke in a low, controlled voice. Elena stopped for a moment, just watching. There was something about him that made her restless. It wasn't just his appearance, though. God knew he was devastating. It was the way he moved, how he spoke, how he occupied the space around him with a magnetic presence impossible to ignore. He hung up the phone and turned around. His eyes met hers immediately, and he smiled, that rare half-smile that made her stomach flip. "Welcome back," he said, his voice soft, almost warm. "Thank you," Elena replied, placing her purse on the desk. "And, thank you for the jacket. I brought it back." She held out the jacket to him, but Alexander shook his head. "Keep it. You might need it again." "I'm not going to sleep in the office again," she said quickly, her face heating up. "I know." He walked over to her desk, stopping too close, as he always did. "But still keep it." Elena didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and placed the jacket on her chair. She spent the rest of the afternoon working in silence, but she was completely aware of him, of every movement, of every time he looked up at her, of every breath. At 4 p.m., Alexander asked her to accompany him to a meeting. "Just as an observer," he explained. "I want you to see how things work here." The meeting was in the conference room on the 12th floor, a huge glass table, leather chairs, and an entire wall covered with screens showing graphs and numbers. There were 6 men in the room, all in suits, all older, all looking at Elena as if she were an intruder. Alexander sat at the head of the table. Elena sat beside him, trying to seem invisible. The meeting started. Numbers were presented. Strategies discussed. Alexander led everything with a calm and devastating confidence. And then, one of the men, gray hair, thin glasses, condescending smile, said something that made Elena freeze. "I think we should reconsider the partnership with Langford Corp. Their numbers last quarter were disappointing." Alexander nodded, flipping through the papers in front of him. "Agreed." Let's cut them. But Elena had read that report. She had seen the numbers, and they weren't telling the complete story. She bit her lip, hesitating. It's not your place. You're just an observer. Stay quiet. But she couldn't. Actually, she said, her voice firm but gentle, Langford core numbers last quarter were affected by a temporary supply crisis. If you look at the long-term projection, they're expected to grow 18% next year. Silence. All the men turned to look at her, some with surprise, others with irritation. And Alexander. Alexander was looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. The gray-haired man frowned. And you are? Elena Reed, Mr. Hawthorne's assistant, she answered. He smiled, condescendingly. But I don't think an assistant has enough experience to weigh in on strategic decisions. Elena's blood boiled. Maybe not, she said. But I have eyes to read a financial report, and that report says cutting Langford would be a mistake. The man opened his mouth to respond, but Alexander interrupted him. She's right. Everyone turned to him. Alexander was looking directly at Elena, his gray eyes intense, almost burning. She's right, he repeated. Well, keep the partnership with Langford. Meeting adjourned. The men left the room, some murmuring among themselves, casting curious glances at Elena. And then they were alone. Alexander stood up, walked to the door, and closed it. The sound of the latch echoed in the empty room. Elena swallowed hard. He turned to face her, his jaw muscles tense, his eyes dark. What was that? He asked, his voice low, controlled. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken. You corrected me in front of everyone. I know. I'm really sorry. I saw the numbers and thought, you thought you knew more than me. Elena felt her face heat with anger. No. I thought you were about to make a mistake. And you were. He took a step toward her. Then another. Elena instinctively stepped back, but her back hit the glass wall. He kept advancing until he was right in front of her, so close she had to tilt her face up to look into his eyes. You think you know this world? He asked, his voice husky, dangerous. I know I deserve more than being treated like I don't matter. She pushed his chest with her hands. He didn't move. Instead, he grabbed her wrists, holding them firmly, not hurting but preventing her from escaping. You don't know anything about me, he said, his voice low, intense. You don't know what I've been through to get here. You don't know what I've sacrificed. Then tell me. Elena shot back, her breathing quickening. Stop treating me like I'm invisible and tell me. His eyes dropped from her eyes to her lips and stayed there. The air disappeared from the room. Elena felt his heat radiating through his suit, felt his fingers tightening slightly on her wrists, felt his breath quickening against her face. They were so close she could see the golden flecks in the gray of his eyes, could see the tense line of his jaw, could smell his cologne mixed with something more human, more raw. And she knew by the way he looked at her, by the way his breathing was irregular, by the way his fingers trembled slightly on her wrists that he was going to kiss her. Elena closed her eyes, waited, felt his breath brush her lips, felt the heat, felt the desire, and then he stopped. She opened her eyes, confused, and found him looking at her with devastating intensity. If I kiss you, Elena, he whispered, his voice hoarse, broken, I won't be able to stop. Her heart stopped. Then don't stop, she whispered back without thinking. Something broke in his eyes, something dark, dangerous, intense. But he didn't kiss her. Instead, he slowly released her wrists, took a step back, and ran his hands through his hair. I can't, he said, his voice strained. Not like this. Not here. Elena felt something sink in her chest, shame, rejection, confusion. Of course, she said quickly, moving away from the wall. You're right. That was... Sorry. She walked past him quickly, opening the door and leaving the room before he could see the tears burning in her eyes. But as she walked down the hallway, her heart shattered. She could still feel it. She could feel his fingers on her wrists, could feel his breath on her lips, could feel the ghost of the kiss that almost happened. And she knew she would never be the same again. Elena looked out the car window as the city disappeared behind them, replaced by empty roads and open sky. She hadn't spoken much since they left Manhattan. Neither had Alexander. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with everything that almost happened in the conference room 3 days ago. She could still feel it, still remembered. And by the way, he gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary. So did he. "How long until we get there?" she asked, just to break the silence. 2 hours, Alexander replied, his eyes fixed on the road. Maybe less. They were heading to Boston, an important meeting with investors. Alexander needed to close a $15 million deal, and he had insisted Elena come with him. "You need to learn how these things work," he had said. But Elena suspected there was something more, something unspoken, something that pulsed in the air between them since that almost kiss. When they finally arrived at the hotel, the sun was already setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Alexander stopped the car in front of the entrance and handed the keys to the valet. Elena grabbed her small suitcase and followed him to the reception desk. "Reservation for Alexander Hawthorne," he told the receptionist, a young man with blonde hair and a cordial smile. The receptionist typed something on the computer, frowned, typed more, and then looked at Alexander with an apologetic expression. "Mr. Hawthorne, I apologize, but it seems there was an error in the system. We only have one room available." Alexander tensed. "What do you mean, one room?" "I booked 2. "Yes, sir, but the system only registered 1, and unfortunately the hotel is completely booked due to a convention. I'm truly sorry." Elena felt her stomach flip. "One room. One room for both of them." Alexander ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "There's nothing available?" "No, sir. I can call nearby hotels if no." Alexander sighed. "Fine. Well, figure it out." He took the key and turned to Elena, his eyes full of something that looked like an apology. "I'll sleep on the couch," he said quickly. "You take the bed." Elena wanted to argue, but the truth was she was exhausted, so she just nodded. The room was nice, spacious, with a king-size bed covered in pristine white sheets, a huge window overlooking the city, and a small couch in the corner too small for someone Alexander's size. "Look, I can sleep on the couch," Elena offered, eyeing the piece of furniture that clearly wouldn't accommodate his legs. "Not a chance," Alexander said, already removing his jacket and tossing it over the chair. "You're my guest. I'll take the couch." "Alexander, Elena." He looked at her with that intensity that always left her speechless. "I'm taking the couch." End of discussion. She sighed, defeated. They took turns in the bathroom. Elena showered first, put on the simple pajamas, shed-brought sweatpants, and a t-shirt, and came out to find Alexander sitting on the couch, looking at his phone. He looked up when he saw her, and for a brief second something passed across his face, something soft, almost tender. "Good night," she said, climbing into bed and pulling the covers up to her chin. "Good night, Elena." He turned off the light. Darkness enveloped the room. Elena closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. She was too aware of him, of the sound of his breathing, of the way he shifted on the couch trying to find a comfortable position, of the heavy silence that filled the space between them. Eventually, exhaustion won, and she slept. She was running. She didn't know from what. She only knew she had to run. The streets were empty, dark, cold, and there was a voice calling her name, a voice she knew, a voice she loved. "Elena. Elena. Wait." She turned around and saw him, her father, standing in the middle of the street with that gentle smile she hadn't seen in years. "Dad." He reached out his hand. "Come, sweetheart, come with me." She took a step, then another. But just as she was about to reach him, he disappeared. And she was alone. Always alone. Elena woke with a scream caught in her throat. She was sweating, shaking. Tears streamed down her face without her being able to control them. And then, he was there. Alexander rushed to the bed, kneeling beside her, holding her face with both hands. "Elena, wake up. It's just a dream. Wake up." She blinked, disoriented, and saw him so close, so real. "Alex." Her voice came out broken, hoarse. "I'm here," he said, his voice soft, protective. "I'm here. You're okay. It was just a nightmare." But she wasn't okay. The tears kept falling. Her body kept shaking. The pain, that old, deep pain she always tried to bury, rose to the surface. "I hate remembering," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I hate feeling weak." Alexander ran his thumbs across her cheeks, wiping away the tears. "You're not weak. You're the strongest woman I know." Elena sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Alexander didn't hesitate. He climbed onto the bed beside her on top of the covers, keeping a layer of fabric between them, and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Elena buried her face in his chest, feeling the warmth, the smell, the solidity of him. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. They stayed like that for long minutes, him holding her, her trembling in his arms, neither of them saying anything until Elena finally whispered, "It was about my father." Alexander said nothing, just ran his hand through her hair, gentle, comforting. "He died when I was 16, she continued, her voice choked. "Cancer. It was fast. One day he was fine. The next—" She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I couldn't say goodbye properly. I was too young, too scared, and now he appears in my dreams, and I can never reach him." Alexander tightened his arms around her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you went through that." Elena pulled back slightly, looking at him in the dimness. "Did you lose someone too?" He was silent for a moment, and then he nodded. "My younger brother. Car accident. I was 22. He was 18. Elena felt her chest tighten. "Alex. He was my best friend," Alexander continued, his voice failing. "And I wasn't there when he needed me. I was working, always working. And when I got the call—" He closed his eyes. The pain was visible even in the darkness. It was too late. Elena held his face with her hands, forcing him to look at her. "It wasn't your fault, I know, but that doesn't make it easier." She pressed her forehead against his. "Do you miss him every day?" "Every day," he whispered. "But tonight I don't feel so alone." Elena felt something break inside her, something she had protected for so long, and then she asked, so quietly she could barely hear her own voice, "Have you ever missed someone so much it hurts?" Alexander opened his eyes, meeting hers in the darkness. "Every day," he repeated. "But tonight I don't miss anyone. Because you're here." Her heart stopped, and in that moment, wrapped in darkness, holding each other as if they were the only real thing in the world, everything changed. Elena woke up slowly, consciousness returning in soft layers. Warmth, that was the first thing she felt. Warmth enveloping her body like a living blanket. And then the smell, that woody, masculine, unmistakable scent she already knew so well. Alexander. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the soft morning light coming through the window. And she froze because he was there right beside her, so close she could count every eyelash, so close she could feel his breath brushing her face. He was still asleep, his mouth slightly parted, a strand of dark hair falling across his forehead. His jaw relaxed without the tension he always carried during the day. He looked different, younger, more vulnerable, more human. Elena should pull away, should get out of bed, create distance, remind herself of all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, but she couldn't. Instead, she stayed there, watching, memorizing every detail, the curve of his lips, the strong line of his nose, the shadow of stubble beginning to show on his jaw. Hez, beautiful. The thought came without permission. But it was true. Alexander Hawthorne was devastating, not in the superficial way magazines always showed, but in a real way, raw, dangerous. And Elena was lost. Completely, hopelessly lost. Without thinking, without letting logic intervene, she leaned forward just a little, just enough to, her lips touched his soft, hesitant, like a whispered question. For a second, nothing happened. And then she felt it. He moved. His lips responded slowly, almost unwillingly, and then his eyes opened stormy gray, meeting confused amber. Elena froze, her heart racing, her face burning with embarrassment. She began, trying to pull away. "Sorry, I shouldn't have." But before she could finish, Alexander held her face with both hands and pulled her back. "Elena," his voice was hoarse, loaded, broken. "I'm so sorry. I just know." He looked at her with an intensity that made all the air leave the room. "No, don't apologize for wanting me. Her heart stopped. And then he kissed her. For real. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was hunger. It was desire. It was everything they'd been holding back for weeks, exploding all at once. His lips captured hers with an urgency that made her body react instantly. She felt the heat spread from her chest to her stomach, going lower, burning every nerve ending. His hands were in her hair, pulling gently, tilting her head at the perfect angle. His mouth moved against hers with a skill that made her tremble. Elena held his face, pulling him closer, deeper, wanting, needing more. Alexander growled low in his throat, the sound vibrating against her lips, and turned her, placing her on her back on the mattress while he positioned himself over her. The weight of his body against hers was delicious, overwhelming, perfect. He broke the kiss for a second, just long enough to look into her eyes, his breathing irregular, his eyes dark with desire. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice desperate. "Tell me to stop, and I'll stop." Elena held his face with both hands, pulling him back. "Don't even think about it." Something broke in him. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his tongue meeting hers in a dance that made her body arch, involuntarily against his. His hands moved down her body, slowly exploring, memorizing every curve. They passed along the side of her neck, down her shoulders, slid along her waist, squeezing her hips gently. Elena felt her body react in ways she didn't even know were possible: heat, desire, need. She ran her hands over his shoulders, feeling the tense muscles beneath his skin, and pulled him even closer. Alexander broke the kiss again, breathless, and moved his lips down her jaw, down her neck, planting kisses that made her skin burn. "Elena," he whispered, against her skin, his voice broken. "God, Elena." She buried her fingers in his hair, eyes closed, lost in the sensation. "Alex, please." He returned to her lips, kissing her with an intensity that made the world spin. And then, suddenly, he stopped, pulled back slightly, his face inches from hers, his breathing irregular. "Wait," he said, his voice strained. "Wait, I need to be sure." Elena opened her eyes, confused, still dizzy. Sure of what? He held her face with both hands, his gray eyes locked on hers with devastating intensity. "Sure that this is what you want. Sure that you won't wake up tomorrow and regret it. Sure that—" he paused, his voice failing. "Sure that this isn't just physical for you, because for me—" he closed his eyes as if the words were painful. "For me, this is everything." Elena's heart almost exploded. She held his face, forcing him to look at her. "Alexander Hawthorne," she said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He looked at her for a long moment, searching, analyzing, believing, and then he smiled. It wasn't a half smile. It wasn't hesitant. It was a real smile, complete, devastating. "Then come here," he whispered, pulling her back into his arms. And they lost themselves in each other, deep kisses, hands exploring, irregular breathing, low whispers. Alexander slid his hands along the side of her body, pulling her t-shirt slightly up, exposing the skin of her stomach. His fingers traced patterns on her skin, making her shiver. Elena pulled his shirt up, and he pulled away just enough to remove it completely, tossing it on the floor. She looked at him, the broad chest, the defined muscles, the tanned skin, and felt her mouth go dry. He came back to her, kissing her again while her hands explored his chest, his shoulders, his back. "You're beautiful," he whispered against her lips. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you." Elena felt tears burn in her eyes. "Alex." He kissed her again slowly, this time, deep, meaningful. And then he whispered against her lips, so quietly she almost didn't hear, "You're mine, Elena. No matter what happens, you'll always be mine." And in that moment, wrapped in each other, lost in the heat and desire and something much bigger than both of them, Elena knew. She knew she had fallen in love with the wrong man, or maybe the only right one. The morning light came softly through the curtains, painting the room in golden tones. Elena was lying on her back, her heart still racing from the kiss that seemed to have lasted an eternity. Alexander was beside her, propped up on his elbow, looking at her with those gray eyes that now seemed darker, not with anger, but with desire. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. They didn't need to. The air between them was loaded with everything that couldn't be said in words, silent promises, unconfessed fears, and a desire that pulsed like something alive, impossible to ignore. Alexander ran his fingers lightly across her face, tracing the line of her jaw down her neck, stopping at her shoulder. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice loaded. "Because if you're not, we stop now. No judgment. No hard feelings." Elena held his hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm sure," she whispered. "I want this. I want you." Something broke in his eyes, something deep and devastating. He leaned in and kissed her slowly, this time reverent, as if he were memorizing her taste, the texture of her lips, the way she sighed softly against his mouth. His hands slid along the side of her body, pulling her t-shirt up inch by inch, exposing her skin to the morning light. Elena raised her arms, allowing him to remove it completely. Alexander stopped for a moment, just looking. His eyes traveled over every curve, every line, every mark on her body. "You're perfect," he whispered, his voice broken. Elena felt her face heat up, but she didn't look away, didn't hide. "I'm not," she said, "but thank you for making me feel that way." He shook his head. "Serious. No, you are perfect, and I'm going to spend all night proving it to you." And then he kissed her again, his hands exploring with a reverence that made her heart ache. He moved his lips down her neck, planting soft kisses on her collarbone, down her shoulder, along her chest, down her stomach. Each touch was fire, each kiss a promise. Elena closed her eyes, her fingers buried in his hair, her breathing irregular. "Alex." Her voice came out as a broken sigh. He returned to her lips, holding her face with both hands. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here, Elena. Just you and me. No one else." She opened her eyes, meeting his, and saw everything there: desire, yes, but something more, something bigger, something neither of them had the courage to name yet. Elena slid her hands down his chest, feeling the tense muscles under her fingers, and moved down to the waistband of the sweatpants he was wearing. "Your turn," she whispered, pulling gently. Alexander smiled, that devastating smile she was beginning to love, and helped, removing his pants and tossing them on the floor with the rest of the clothes. Now there were no more barriers, just skin against skin, heat against heat. He positioned himself over her, propped up on his elbows so as not to put all his weight on her body, and stopped. He looked into her eyes, his breathing irregular, desire battling with restraint. "Last chance," he said, his voice strained. "Say no now, and I stop. But if we continue, Elena, if we continue, there's no going back. You understand?" She understood. She understood perfectly what he was saying, that this was going to change everything, that they were going to cross a line from which there was no return. And she wanted to. God, how she wanted to. "I want this," she repeated, pulling his face closer. "I want you now. Please." Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength, and then he kissed her and gave himself over. It was slow at first, careful, gentle. Alexander moved with a tenderness that made her eyes burn, as if she were precious, fragile, something that needed to be protected. "Look at me," he whispered, holding her face. "Stay with me, Elena. Look at me." She opened her eyes, meeting his, and got lost in the stormy gray, lost in the heat, lost in the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the universe who mattered. "Alex." She arched against him, her fingers digging into his shoulders. He buried his face in her neck, his breath hot and irregular against her skin. "God, Elena, you have no idea what you do to me." The words came out broken, desperate, as if he were fighting to maintain control. But Elena didn't want control. She wanted everything. "Then show me," she whispered in his ear. "Show me, Alex." Something broke in him. The rhythm changed faster, more urgent, more intense. His hands were everywhere, buried in her hair, on her face, on her hips, pulling her closer, deeper. Elena closed her eyes, her head thrown back, lost in a wave of sensations she had never felt before: heat, pleasure, connection, and something more, something that went far beyond the physical. "Elena." Alexander moaned low, his voice broken. "Look at me, please." She opened her eyes, breathless, and met his, and saw everything. Saw the desire, the passion, the vulnerability, and saw something more, something that made her want to cry and smile at the same time. Love. He loved her. And God, she loved him too. Alex. The words died in her throat, swallowed by a low moan, when pleasure reached an impossible peak. Alexander held her tighter, his arms wrapping around her completely, as if he wanted to protect her from the entire world. I know, he whispered against her lips. I know, love. Me too. Me too. And then, together, they lost themselves completely, irrevocably, forever. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms, their bodies intertwined, their breathing finally returning to normal. Elena had her head on his chest, listening to his racing heart gradually calm down. Alexander ran his fingers slowly through her hair, the touch gentle, almost absent-minded. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The silence said everything, until Alexander finally whispered, so quietly she almost didn't hear, "You're everything I didn't know I needed." Elena lifted her head, looking at him. He was looking at the ceiling, his jaw tense, his eyes shining with something that looked like vulnerability. She held his face, turning it toward her. "Then hold me like you mean it." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he pulled her closer, wrapping her completely in his arms. "You're mine, Elena," he whispered against the top of her head. "No matter what happens, you'll always be mine." Elena closed her eyes, feeling his warmth envelop her like a blanket, and for the first time in years, she felt at home. But deep in her mind, a little voice whispered, "This can't last. People like you don't end up with people like him. You know that." She ignored the voice. For that night at least, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was enough. Elena woke up alone. The bed was cold on the side where Alexander had slept. She ran her hand over the sheets, searching for his warmth, but found only emptiness. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheet against her chest, and looked around. The hotel room was silent, too silent. "Alex?" she called, her voice still hoarse from sleep. "Nothing." She got up, put on the t-shirt that was lying on the floor, and walked to the living area of the suite and stopped. Alexander was standing near the window, his back to her, the phone pressed to his ear. He wore only his suit pants, his chest bare, the muscles in his back tense like ropes about to snap. "I already said no," he was saying, his voice low but hard as steel. "It's none of your business." Elena stood still, unsure whether she should approach or go back to the bedroom. But then she heard the voice on the other end of the line, loud, furious, female. "Alexander James Hawthorne, you cannot be serious." The voice echoed through the speakerphone. "You're sleeping with your assistant? Have you completely lost your mind?" Elena felt her stomach flip. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, frustrated. "Mom, I'm not discussing this with you." "Yes, you are." The woman's voice was loaded with indignation. "That girl is a nobody, Alexander. She has no education, no breeding, nothing that fits into our family." Each word was a stab. Elena took a step back, her legs shaking. "She's not a nobody." Alexander shot back, his voice rising. "And you have no right to talk about her like that." "I have every right. I'm your mother, and I'm telling you now, either you end this, or I'm going to the press. I'll tell everyone that the CEO of Hawthorne Global is having an inappropriate affair with an unqualified assistant. Imagine the scandal, Alexander. Imagine what it will do to the company's stock." Silence. A heavy, deadly silence. Elena saw his shoulders drop, saw defeat take over his posture. "You wouldn't do that," he said, but his voice had no strength. "I would. And you know it." His mother's voice was cold now, calculating. "You have until Monday to sort this out. End it with her, Alexander, or I'll end your career." The call ended. Alexander stood still, looking out the window, his hands clenched into fists. Elena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. A nobody. Unqualified. Scandal. The words echoed in her mind like funeral bells. And then, a male voice came through the door. "Alex." It was his brother Lucas, tall, blonde, cold blue eyes. "We need to talk." Alexander turned around, surprised. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" Lucas entered the room, closing the door behind him, and then he saw Elena standing there in a t-shirt and bare legs, her eyes wide. He raised an eyebrow. "Seriously, Alex?" He shook his head, disappointed. "Mom told me, but I didn't believe it." "You're really destroying yourself over her?" Alexander took a step forward, protective. "Watch what you're about to say." "Or what?" Lucas crossed his arms. "You're going to hit me. Come on, Alex. You know this can't continue. She's not from our world. She never will be. And the more you insist on this, the more you put the company at risk. The company will survive, but you won't." Lucas approached, his voice low, threatening. "The board is already talking. They're considering removing you from the presidency if you don't clean up this mess. Do you understand? You're going to lose everything." Alexander remained silent, his jaw muscles clenched. And Elena saw it, saw the struggle happening inside him, saw love battling against duty, saw the man she loved being torn apart between two worlds, and she knew that no matter how much he loved her, this was never going to work, because his world was bigger than both of them, and she was just a girl who didn't belong anywhere. Lucas cast one last look at Alexander and left, slamming the door. The silence that remained was deafening. Alexander slowly turned to Elena, and she saw everything on his face, the pain, the guilt, the impossibility. "Elena," he began, his voice broken. "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "Don't say anything." "I need to explain. You don't need to." She forced a smile, even with tears burning in her eyes. "I understand. I always knew this was going to happen." "No, you don't understand." He walked to her, holding her face with both hands. "I love you, Elena. I love you more than anything in this world." The tears finally fell. "Then let me go." He froze. "What? If you truly love me," she whispered, her voice breaking, "let me go, because I can't watch you lose everything because of me. I can't stand being the reason you destroy yourself." "You're not the reason. They are." He gripped her face, desperate. "I can fight them. I can, and lose everything. Your company, your name, your family." She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "No, Alex, I won't let you do that." "Then stay. Stay with me and we'll face this together." Elena closed her eyes, her heart shattered. "I can't, Alex. I can't." She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because I love you too much to watch you suffer, and every time you look at me, you'll remember what you lost, what you sacrificed, and I can't stand being that for you." Alexander stood still, trembling, his hands still extended where her face had been. "So, that's it." He let out a bitter laugh without humor. "You're just going to leave?" "Yes." She turned, grabbing her purse that was on the couch. "Because if I stay, it'll destroy you, and I love you too much to do that." She walked to the bedroom, grabbed her clothes, dressed quickly with trembling hands. When she returned to the living room, Alexander was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. Elena stopped at the door. She wanted to say something, wanted to run to him, hug him, tell him it was going to be okay, that they would find a way, but it wasn't going to be okay. So she just whispered, "I love you, Alexander Hawthorne. I'll love you forever," and left. The door closed behind her with a soft sound, and Alexander collapsed. Elena arrived home 3 hours later, her eyes swollen from crying so much. She sat at the kitchen table, picked up paper and a pen, and began to write. "Alex, I love you. That's why I'm leaving." The words came out blurred by the tears falling on the paper. But she continued, because he needed to know, he needed to understand that she wasn't running away from him. She was running away for him. And when she finished, she folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and left it on the table. Then she packed her bags and left. Alexander found the letter 3 days later, when he finally had the courage to go to her apartment. He read it once, twice, 10 times, and then he sat on the floor, holding the paper against his chest, and let the tears fall because for the first time in his life, Alexander Hawthorne had found something money couldn't buy, and he had lost her. 6 months later, Seattle was different from Manhattan, calmer, greener, more breathable. Elena adjusted her apron and wiped down the counter of the small cafe where she worked. The Daily Brew, a simple name for a simple place. But it was hers, or almost. She managed the place for the owner, a 60-year-old woman named Margaret who made the best chocolate chip cookies in town. It was a different life, simpler, quieter, but her heart still bled. Every morning, she woke up expecting to see him. Every night she fell asleep, remembering him, the woody smell, the rare smile, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the universe who mattered. "You're mine, Elena, no matter what happens." She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away, and forced a smile for the next customer. "Good morning. What can I get you?" The morning passed slowly, some regular customers, some tourists, nothing special until at 2:37 p.m., the door chime rang. Elena had her back turned, preparing a cappuccino, when she heard the footsteps, firm, decisive, familiar. She froze, her heart stopping for a second before racing. No, it can't be. She turned slowly, and there he was, Alexander Hawthorne. No suit, no tie, just dark jeans and a gray shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hair was longer, slightly messy. There was light stubble on his jaw. He looked different. Lighter, more human, more free. His gray eyes met hers, and the world stopped. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare. "Hi," he said, his voice hesitant. "Alex." Her voice came out as a broken whisper. What are you doing here?" He took a step forward, then another. He stopped in front of the counter, his hands in his pockets, his eyes locked on her as if afraid she would disappear if he blinked. "I came to get you." Elena felt tears burn in her eyes. "Alex, you can't just show up here after 6 months, and I sold everything." She stopped. "What?" "My shares, my stake in the company, my name, my legacy." He let out a short laugh without humor. "Everything. I sold everything." Elena felt her legs weaken. "Why?" she whispered, desperate. "Why would you do that?" Alexander walked around the counter, coming to her, stopping so close she could feel his warmth. "Because none of it meant anything without you." The tears began to fall. "Alex, no. You shouldn't have. I spent 6 months without you, Elena." His voice was broken now, loaded with pain. 6 months waking up in an empty apartment. 6 months working in an office that didn't make sense anymore. 6 months pretending everything was fine when the only thing I wanted was you. He held her face with both hands, forcing her to look at him. "I don't want the company. I don't want the money. I don't want the name." He pressed his forehead against hers. Eyes closed. "I just want you. Only you, Elena. It was always only you." Elena sobbed, holding his wrists. "But your family. The board they're going to? They already took everything from me." He opened his eyes, and she saw the truth there. "And you know what? I've never felt so free." She shook her head, tears falling freely. "One day you're going to wake up and realize you gave up everything for me, and you'll hate me for it. Never." He held her face harder, desperate. "You'll never regret choosing you because you're the only thing in my life that was always real, the only thing that was always worth it." And then he knelt down. Elena let out a muffled cry, covering her mouth with her hands. Alexander pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. A ring, simple, delicate, perfect. "I don't have an empire to offer you anymore," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't have an important name or a luxury apartment anymore. All I have is a heart that beats only for you and a life that only makes sense if you're in it." He looked into her eyes, vulnerable, exposed, completely at her mercy. "Marry me, Elena. Say yes. Say yes to forever. Say yes to a simple life but a true one. Say yes to me." Elena couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All she could do was look at the man kneeling in front of her, the man who had given up everything, the man who loved her more than anything in the world, the man who always saw her, really saw her. "Alex," she finally whispered, her voice broken. "Are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want?" He smiled, that devastating smile she loved so much. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And then, Elena did the only thing that made sense. She knelt in front of him, held his face with both hands and said, "Yes, Alex, always yes. He pulled her into his arms, hugging her so tightly she could barely breathe. But it didn't matter because for the first time in months, she was home. Alexander slipped the ring on her finger and then kissed her. It was a kiss full of promises, of new beginnings, of forever. When they finally pulled apart, he pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "I love you, Elena Reed, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." She smiled through the tears. "I love you too, Alexander Hawthorne, my CEO without an empire, my millionaire without a fortune, my everything." And as they stayed there, kneeling on the floor of that small cafe in Seattle, holding each other as if nothing else in the world mattered, they both knew. They knew they had found something money could never buy, something the world could never destroy. Love true, pure, eternal. 3 years later, Elena was in the kitchen of the small house they had bought together, preparing dinner, when she felt his arms wrap around her waist from behind. "Hi, Mrs. Reed," Alexander whispered in her ear, planting a soft kiss on her neck. She smiled, turning in his arms. "Hi, Mr. Reed." He had insisted on changing his last name to hers. "Hawthorne carries a weight I don't want anymore. Reed is new. It's ours." Alexander looked at her with that look that still made her melt. "I love you," he said, as he said every day. "I know," she replied, smiling, "and I love you too." He held her face, looking into her eyes with that intensity that had never changed. "You saved me, you know that," he whispered. "You saved me from a life that didn't make sense, from a world that never made me happy." Elena held his hand, intertwining their fingers. "You saved me too. You showed me that I deserve to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen." He kissed her soft, deep, meaningful, and when they pulled apart, she whispered against his lips, "Thank you for choosing me." He smiled. "Always. Love. Always." And in that moment, in the kitchen of a simple house in Seattle, far from the lights of Manhattan, far from the empire he had left behind, they were complete. Because in the end, love wasn't about having everything. It was about having the right person, and they had each other forever. In the end, Elena and Alexander discovered something that few have the courage to accept. True love doesn't ask the world for permission. It simply happens. And when it happens, it demands choices, sometimes the hardest ones. Alexander gave up an empire built over generations. Elena abandoned the security of a life without risks. But what they gained was something no title, no fortune, no name could buy: the freedom to be true, the peace of being chosen, the privilege of waking up every day next to the person who saw them, truly saw them. Because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. And you have the courage to leave everything behind for love?